I want you to picture something. It's 1826. You are standing on the dock in Honolulu.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, and the trade winds are blowing, the air smells like salt and maybe some wood smoke. It is this vibrant, independent, tropical kingdom. But when you look out at the harbor, the view is, well, it's changed.
It's not just merchant ships out there anymore.
Right. Looming over the smaller vessels, you've got the Dolphin and the Peacock. These are heavy United States warships. Cannons are run out, Marines on deck.
Intimidating stuff.
Very. But here's the thing. They are not there to annex the islands. They aren't fending off an invasion. They are literally just there to collect a bill.
A literal bill. They're basically debt collectors with heavy artillery.
Exactly. And that image, these gunboats acting as repo men, is really the perfect opening for our deep dive today. We are looking at a topic we're calling the price of the Golden Age.
It's a fascinating one.
It really is. And to get into it, we have this incredible stack of sources. We're looking at ship logs from New Bedford, official government reports from the Hawaiian Kingdom, and some pretty dense historical economic analyses.
And the mission here, our goal for this deep dive, is to figure out how Hawaii shifted from this self-sufficient subsistence economy to a mercantilist one that was completely chained to the global market.
And how that shift sparked this crazy chain reaction of debt, legal overhauls, and a diaspora that almost emptied the islands of their young men.
Yeah. The story these sources tell is a lot darker than what you see on vintage postcards.
So let's start at the beginning, or I guess the beginning of the trouble. Late 1700s. Hawaii is on the map, ships are stopping by, but initially it's pretty low stakes.
Very low stakes. For the first few decades after Western contact, Hawaii is essentially a service station.
Right.
Ships sailing from the Pacific Northwest to China to trade furs would just stop in Hawaii for a pit stop. They needed water, salt, maybe some pork.
So it was a barter economy? Pork for nails. Keep it simple.
See, exactly.
Yeah.
The economic base of the islands didn't fundamentally change during that time. But around 1810, that dynamic flips. Traders realized that Hawaii isn't just a gas station. It's a gold mine.
Or a wood mine, really.
Right, soft gold. That's what they called sandalwood.
And the mountains of Hawaii were just covered in these fragrant sandalwood forests. And over in China, this stuff was incredibly valuable for incense, furniture, carving.
The demand was practically bottomless.
And that kicks off sandalwood fever. But reading through these sources, the thing that really struck me was the timing. It starts around 1810, but then it goes into absolute overdrive around 1819. And the notes mention a financial crisis in the U.S. right then.
That is the key piece of context that people usually miss. The panic of 1819. The U.S. economy crashed. Hard.
Wow.
Yeah. So traders in New England were suddenly cash poor. They couldn't get gold or silver, which they called specie, to pay for goods in China. They were desperate for anything they could trade that wasn't cash.
So they look across the Pacific at Hawaii and see a forest full of currency.
Precisely. And they descend on the islands with a deeply predatory strategy. They realize the Hawaiian chiefs, the alii, are fascinated by Western goods.
Right.
So these Yankee traders, who are effectively broke back home, just start unloading inventory on credit.
And looking at the manifest of what they were selling, it is bizarre. I mean, scissors, pins, clothing, that makes sense. But then you see carriages, house frames,
Billiard table.
billiard tables.
Yeah.
In 1820s Hawaii, purely from a practical standpoint, where do you even put a billiard table in a traditional grass structure?
You don't. You actually have to build a Western-style house just to house the billiard table.
That's insane.
But that's the genius and the insidiousness of the sales pitch. They weren't just selling games. They were selling civilization. They were telling the chiefs, look, this is what powerful modern leaders own. You want to be a player on the world stage, you need the trappings.
So it's pure status signaling.
100%. But the chiefs didn't have the cash either. So the traders said, hey, no problem. Sign here.
And that is the trap, the promissory notes.
Right. They signed notes denominated in pickles of sandalwood.
A pickles is a weight measurement, right, about 133 pounds.
Exactly. And the interest rates on these notes were totally predatory. The debt ballooned incredibly fast. By the mid-1820s, the chiefs collectively owed American traders something like $150,000 to $160,000.
Which is millions today. But in that context, it was an astronomical, basically unpayable sum.
In wood terms, they owed 15,000 pickles. That is 2 million pounds of wood.
2 million pounds. So the traders come calling, they want their wood. And this is where the sources show the story shifting from just bad financial planning to a full-blown humanitarian crisis, because the chiefs aren't the ones going out to cut the wood.
No. The burden fell entirely on the Makaina, the commoners. The chiefs ordered the people into the upland forests, men, women, children.
Just forced labor.
Yeah. They were forced to hike up into the mountains, often in cold, wet conditions, to harvest this wood to pay off the billiard tables.
I read a report in the sources from the Missionary Herald in 1823, and it paints a really grim picture. It says agricultural productivity hit its lowest level in centuries.
Well, because there was no one left to farm. The taro patches were drying up, fields were abandoned. It led to actual famine conditions in parts of the islands because the entire labor force was exploited to service foreign debt.
And the wood was running out. They were basically clear-cutting the islands.
Harvesting it way faster than it could grow back. The quality dropped, the trees got smaller, but the debt wasn't going away. And when the payments slowed down...
That is when the U.S. Navy gets involved.
Textbook gunboat diplomacy.
Right, so we are back to that image from the start, 1826. Lieutenant Percival arrives on the Dolphin, then Captain Jones on the Peacock. And they are not there for a friendly diplomatic visit.
They're there to enforce the contracts.
But the legal twist here is what I found really fascinating. These were personal debts, right? A chief bought a carriage. That is his personal debt. But the U.S. warships forced a massive change in how those were defined.
This is a pivotal moment for the Hawaiian state. The U.S. commanders basically forced the king and the chiefs to acknowledge these personal luxury debts as government debts.
They nationalized the debt.
Effectively, yes.
Yes.
They created Hawaii's first national debt. They shifted the burden from individual shoppers to the state itself, binding the entire government to American commercial interests.
Just a massive infringement on sovereignty, enforced by cannons pointing at Honolulu.
Exactly.
So by 1830, you have a country stripped of its primary resource. The sandalwood is basically gone. The people are exhausted and starving, and the government is saddled with this huge mortgage. It feels like the country should have just collapsed right there.
It might have. But nature abhors a vacuum, and capitalism does too. Just as the sandalwood trade was dying out, a new economic engine arrived to save the economy. And I say save in very heavy quotation marks.
The whales.
The golden age of whaling.
Right. So 1830 to 1860, this becomes the central economic force of the Pacific. And we need to correct a common misconception here. We usually think of New Bedford, Massachusetts, or Nantucket as the whaling capitals of the world.
And they were the financial hubs, sure. But Hawaii. Hawaii was the field base.
The sources say 6/7 of the entire Pacific whaling fleet operated out of Hawaiian ports, like Honolulu and Lahaina. That is a staggering market share.
The scale is hard to visualize. Think about it this way. In 1833 alone, 78 different whaling vessels docked at Oahu in just an 8-month period. These are massive ships, crews of 30 or 40 men, staying for weeks at a time.
And unlike sandalwood, Hawaii wasn't exporting a product anymore. They weren't selling the whales themselves.
No, they were selling services, provisioning,
Potatoes, beef,
firewood, repairing the hulls, and of course rest and recreation for the sailors, which brought a whole host of other social issues. One historian in our notes put it simply, the whaling fleet made Honolulu. The city literally grew up to service these ships.
It seems like the Hawaiian government was fully aware of this dependence too. I read that they exempted whalers from certain import duties to keep them coming back.
They had to. They were desperate for cash flow to pay off those national debts we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It is this vicious cycle. You need the foreign ships to pay the foreign debts, so you bend your laws to accommodate the foreign ships.
But the whaling industry didn't just take potatoes and water. It took the men.
Yeah, this is the part of the research that really hits you in the gut, the Hawaiian diaspora.
I hadn't realized the scale of this at all. I knew Hawaiians were great sailors, but the numbers here are wild.
Whaling was a brutal, dangerous business. Crews deserted constantly, people died, captains needed replacements, and they needed them fast. And the Hawaiians, or Kanakas as they were called in the logs, were widely considered the absolute best mariners in the world.
So they got recruited.
Aggressively.
We have a statistic from the sources from 1846. The Minister of the Interior reported that approximately 1 in 5 Hawaiian men between the ages of 15 and 30 were wandering on the ocean or in foreign lands.
1 in 5. 20% of your young male population. Imagine walking into your community today and every 5th young man is just gone.
That's a demographic collapse.
It is. These are your future fathers, your community leaders, your workforce. They vanished into the Pacific.
And where did they go? I know a lot of them ended up back in New Bedford.
Many did. New Bedford became this strange, distant satellite of Hawaiian culture. But the reality there wasn't the grand adventure many of them hoped for.
The notes mention the overseers of the poor.
The records there are heartbreaking. You have these skilled mariners who were essential to the success of the voyage. They were harpooners, boat steerers. But when they get back to Massachusetts, they are forced into segregated boarding houses for men of color.
And New England winters are no joke.
Especially if you grew up in Kona. Many of these men ended up totally destitute. They had to rely on charitable institutions or the city almshouse to survive the winter months when the ships weren't sailing.
So they were used for their labor and then just marginalized when they stepped on shore. Did the Hawaiian government try to stop this? Losing 20% of your young men is an emergency?
They did try. They realized they were facing a massive population crisis. Eventually, they passed a law requiring captains to post a bond.
A $200 bond.
Right. For every Hawaiian sailor recruited, the captain had to put up $200 to guarantee that man would be returned to the islands. It was a desperate attempt to plug the leak.
There's one detail in the sources that is a bit lighter, though, about their cultural connection. Even on these grim Yankee ships, the Hawaiians were still finding ways to be Hawaiian.
Oh, I love that detail. The logs mention Hawaiians participating in whale hunts, but using their traditional skills, diving into the water, engaging with the animal in ways the New Englanders thought was completely insane.
Right, and they were making those traditional whale tooth necklaces right there on the deck of a Massachusetts brig.
Maintaining their identity in the belly of the beast. But the tragic irony is that while the men were fighting to keep their culture alive at sea, the culture back home was being dismantled legally.
Which brings us to the land. The Great Mahele.
This is arguably the most critical shift of the 19th century in Hawaii. We talked about trade, we talked about labor, now we have to talk about the dirt itself.
Okay, so set the stage for us. It's the 1840s. The debt is high. The population is dropping. What is the pressure to change the land laws?
The pressure is coming entirely from the Western advisors, the missionaries and the merchants. They are in the king's ear telling him the old system is the problem. Traditionally, the king held all the land in trust for the gods and the people. It was a communal, sort of feudal-style system.
And the Americans hated that.
Hated it. They literally called the natives indolent lazy because they didn't have the drive of private ownership. The missionary rhetoric was that if you give a man a title to his land, he will become industrious.
Sounds like a standard civilizing mission justification.
It was. And on paper, the Great Mahele, the land division, was pitched as a benevolent act. The king was going to divide the land so commoners could own their plots outright in fee simple.
Which sounds great in theory. Land to the commoner.
But the devil is always in the details. The process of claiming that land was incredibly bureaucratic. You had to file surveys, pay fees, appear before a commission. If you're a subsistence farmer who doesn't read English and has no cash, it was practically impossible.
So who actually ended up with the land?
The people who knew how to navigate a Western legal system, the foreigners, the merchants, the early sugar planters, and the missionaries, who conveniently reversed their own rules against owning property right around this time so they could become real estate investors.
The sources draw a direct parallel to Native American history here.
It is the exact same playbook. You break up communal land holdings, turn it into private property, and then, because the indigenous population is impoverished or lacks access to the legal mechanisms, the land is bought up by speculators for pennies on the dollar.
And once you own the land, you own the power.
Exactly. In Hawaii, owning land eventually tied into your right to vote. So by selling off the land, the kingdom was selling off its political sovereignty.
There is an anecdote in the sources that illustrates this clash of worldviews perfectly. The story about the king judging the case of the cow.
Right, it's a small moment, but it says so much. Traditionally, a chief's word was law. He decides who is right based on wisdom and local custom. But suddenly you have the king presiding over a case involving a roaming cow and property damage, and he is having to navigate Western legal concepts of liability and torts.
Why bother? Why not just rule like a traditional king?
Because the gunboats are still watching. British and French warships were threatening the islands during this period too. They were demanding fair treatment for their citizens. If a British subject felt his property rights weren't respected under Western law, he would call in the Royal Navy.
So Hawaii had to westernize its court system just to keep the wolves at bay.
They had to adopt the forms of a Western nation to protect themselves from Western nations. They were trying to thread a very fine needle, modernize fast enough to stay independent. But the tragedy is that in doing so, they built the exact legal structures that the foreigners would eventually use to take over completely.
It's a massive legal trap.
Completely.
So let's fast forward a bit. We get to the 1860s and 70s. The sandalwood is long gone. The whaling boom has been running for decades, but then that engine stalls too.
The end of the Golden Age. It wasn't just one thing, it was a perfect storm. The U.S. Civil War disrupted the whaling fleet significantly.
Confederate raiders were actually sinking Yankee whaling ships in the Pacific.
Yeah, but the final blow was nature. The Arctic disaster of 1871. Whaling had moved north as the Kesh declined in the tropics. And in 1871, the ice just closed in early. 33 ships were crushed.
Just totally destroyed.
It was a catastrophic loss of capital and infrastructure. The Pacific whaling industry never recovered.
But the Hawaiian economy didn't just stop, it shifted again. And this is where all the pieces we've discussed really connect.
Exactly. Because think about who owned the land now. The foreigners. And what do they want to do with it? They didn't want to outfit whaling ships anymore. They wanted to grow sugar.
And during the Civil War, the demand for sugar had skyrocketed.
Right. So the whaling industry fades. But that infrastructure of debt, the Western legal code, and the foreign land ownership, all the things established during the sandalwood and whaling eras, they laid the exact foundation needed for the plantation era.
And meanwhile, the Hawaiian population is still shrinking.
The brain drain of the young men going to sea, combined with introduced diseases. It was sheer devastation. The native population was collapsing, just as the foreign economic power was reaching its absolute peak.
It is such a heavy arc. You look at the start of our story in 1820, a self-sufficient kingdom full of resources, and by 1870, you have a nation hollowed out by debt, its land sold off to its creditors, and its population decimated or scattered across the oceans.
It really is a classic, heartbreaking case study in neocolonialism. We usually think of colonialism as soldiers planting a flag on a beach. But this story shows you don't always need an invading army to conquer a nation. Sometimes all you need is a line of credit and a demand for resources.
The debt was the wedge.
The debt was the wedge. The billiard tables and the carriages were the bait. And the legal system, the land deeds, the Western courts, that was the lock that snapped shut.
It fundamentally changes how you look at trade. We tend to think of trade as mutually beneficial. I have wood, you have scissors, let's swap. But this was something else entirely. This was extraction.
Extraction masquerading as development. The chiefs genuinely thought they were buying into the modern world. They thought they were modernizing their nation to protect it. They didn't realize the price tag was their independence.
Which brings us to the real takeaway for you listening. Why does a stack of 200-year-old shipping logs matter today?
I think the relevance is incredibly stark. Look at the developing world right now. Look at nations taking on massive infrastructure loans from superpowers.
Building ports, highways, airports on credit.
Exactly. The logic is exactly the same. Borrow now to modernize. But when you can't pay, what do you give up? You give up your ports. You give up your natural resources. You give up your sovereignty.
The mechanism hasn't changed at all, just the scale.
The promissory note is still mightier than the sword. Though, as we saw with the dolphin and the peacock, the sword is usually waiting just offshore if the check bounces.
We have covered a lot of ground today. From the fragrant sandalwood forests to the frozen ice of the Arctic and those segregated boarding houses of New Bedford.
It is a massive global story, but anchored in a very specific, beautiful place.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with that image we talked about earlier, the billiard table.
The ultimate symbol of useless luxury in a tropical climate.
The chiefs bought them on credit, thinking they were buying civilization, status, a seat at the big kids' table, but they were actually mortgaging their future.
Buying the symbol, selling the reality.
So here is the question for you to mull over today. What are the billiard tables of today? When we, whether as nations or just as individuals, buy into the shiny, imported symbols of success on credit, what are we actually paying with? Are we buying the future? Or are we just selling it off, one monthly payment at a time?
That is the question.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
After 1,000 roads, I finally arrived here. The great wave of time makes us one drop in the stream. by the wind, I step upon this soil, a rhythm set long ago, long before we knew the home your heart was searching for is a journey back to the ancient core. We're travelers on an endless road, like water flowing from the mountain to the sea. Our joys and sorrows of today nourish the earth and flow into the years to be. In this unbroken chain, under the eternal sun, resting on the prayers of the ones before. It's the life we live forevermore. Someone's kindness turns into the rain. The path you walk becomes the road for those who follow. Even if we fade and the days are through, your soul keeps burning in the heart of someone new. And way down the line, in the years to come, we'll meet again where the rivers run. We're travelers on an endless road, like water flowing from the mountain to the sea. Our joys and sorrows of today nourish the earth and flow into the years to be. In this unbroken chain, the wind carries the voices of those who came. Ancient memories and the heartbeat of now, melting together in a sacred vow.